wasn't until they saw my hand move that they would change their plans. And I'm glad that they did, because come to find out, if they didn't see my hand move, I would have probably been burned alive that day. I believe we live in a world where people have the ability to make choices. We have free will, and our choices have consequences. EPIC is an acronym. The E stands for embrace challenges. And then we have the P, which is provide perspective. And then we have the I, which is implement change. And then we have the C, which is celebrate. Celebrate your story. Celebrate the fact that you're here, that you're alive, that you have another day to live. And out of that celebration, we're serving others.
You're listening to the Radcast. If it's radical, we cover it. Here's your host, Ryan Alford.
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the latest edition of the Radcast. And adding a little extra rad there at the beginning. And, I felt the need to today because we've got a radical story that I'm excited to tell. Welcome to the show, international speaker, best-selling author, Cody Byrns. What's up, brother?
Hey, man. You are. I'm glad to be here with you.
Hey, man. We're excited to have you. Sometimes we have guests that, they've got a great brand. They're talking about certain things, but maybe the story's so-so. But I think you have an amazing story of inspiration and just overall radicalness that, I'm excited for all of our audience to hear.
Thank you, man. Yeah, it's quite an interesting story. I'm an interesting character, so I hope the listeners and viewers enjoy it.
Well, I'm sure they will. Let's just start right down the path, man. I want to just tee it up for you. Let's talk about Cody Byrns. Let's talk about your background and, what's led you, to, why and how you're speaking today, how you're guiding people, how you're inspiring people. But let's just talk about that story, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So my story kind of begins like everyone's story back in childhood, and I had an amazing family, still very close with all of them today. And I grew up in southern Indiana, right in the middle of a cornfield. And so you kind of learn and find ways to entertain yourself. And I remember as a youngster, my family took me to a circus. Now you're wondering, what the heck has this got to do with anything? Going somewhere.
My mind went down the carny route in a hurry.
Yeah, going down the carny route. Here we are. Brace yourself, folks. So I go to the circus, and my family was they was enjoying it. Obviously I was. It was the first time I ever went. But there was one act that really stood out to me more than any of them, and it was this juggler that was down there doing all these tricks. And I remember myself wanting to learn how to do that. And so as soon as I left the circus, I started practicing. Taught myself how to juggle 3 balls. A few years later, I would go to a children's camp, and I seen this speaker up on the platform, because there's activities during the day, like to swim and so forth, but at night they had a camp speaker. And so all of us kids, we were there in this big auditorium, speakers on stage, sharing this message of hope. But at the same time he was doing that, he was juggling. And so I'm like, get out of here. This is cool to see how the two mix so well together. And something on the inside of me in that moment said that this is what I'm called to do. And so from a young age, I had a passion to give hope to people, and doing it along with juggling and comedy and finding creative ways to get the message across. So I pursued that. And time I got out of high school, I went to a ministry training program in Rockford, Illinois, and I got my pastoral credentials. At the same time of being a pastor, I work with children. I'll go backward on that. I work with kids. I was a kids pastor. At the same time of working with kids on a weekly basis, I got to travel the country, do motivational speaking and using juggling and comedy. Spoke at kids camps, conferences, all kinds of fun stuff. It was really starting to take off internationally. Up until the point of being 23 years old, I had spoken to thousands of children across the nation, and as well as teenagers and adults, but my audience more so at the time was with children. And then in May of 2013, my life took a drastic turn, and I was stopped at a red light on the highway. It was a Friday afternoon in southern Indiana. And at this red light, everything goes black, almost as if I didn't exist. And everything I share with people, it's strictly from witnesses, police reports, and the first responders, because I don't remember a thing. I just remember driving that morning, and I technically don't even remember being at the red light, but I was. And what I'm told is that I was rear-ended by a refrigerator box truck that did not stop. And so on impact of the box truck hitting I was in a Dodge Durango. On impact of it hitting that, my Dodge blows up into flames. And it pushed my car through the intersection into an embankment. And when the first responders came to the scene, by the looks of it, they said, it's a fatality. So they had already called the coroner and assumed I was dead. And it wasn't until they saw my hand move that they would change their plans. And I'm glad that they did, because come to find out, if they didn't see my hand move, I would have probably been burned alive that day. But there's a powerful message in that, because I think there's a lot of people in today's world, COVID world especially, that have found themselves at stoplights. And those stoplights, maybe the career is no longer what it used to be, or maybe there's death in the family, or a divorce, who knows, the list goes on, where life as we know it suddenly comes to a complete stop. And we find ourselves in difficult circumstances, trapped in the heat of life, and I certainly was. And for those that are interested, there are images online, on Google. If they type in my name, there's photos and videos where it shows the actual wreck. The sheriff's department took hundreds of pictures that day, and I'm inside this burning vehicle. And it's quite remarkable to really kind of look back and see what I did survive. But all that to say, there's people that have found themselves in tough situations. And no different than my hand, that little bit of movement, it changed everything for me. And I wonder what a little bit of movement can do for many individuals in their life. Maybe they have found themselves trapped. But I dare everyone to take a little bit of movement and then see what may happen in their life. And it made a tremendous difference for me. So they got me out of that car. It took them a good hour. They then put me on a stretcher. They life flighted me to the burn unit in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I was put into a coma on full life support. 40% of my body severely burned. My face did have second degree, which really that part isn't a severe burn. Second degree doesn't scar. But then I had third and fourth degree burns. I never knew there was such a thing as a fourth degree burn, but they exist. And what that does, it burns through all your fat cells down to bone and muscle. And in some cases, it requires amputation. I had torn ligaments, broken vertebrae. I mean, all kinds of things happened. I had a blood infection in the unit. A lot went down. But as I said, I was in a coma, and I was there for 3 weeks in a medically induced coma. And it wasn't until then I would kind of come to and realize what had happened to me. And I will pause there because I can keep rattling on, but I want to let you chime in.
No, man, so much to unpack there. The impact, I mean, both literally and physically. But I do want to start, it led me to this question, Cody, and I don't know if you've been asked this. I mean, you're obviously a man of faith, I believe. Is that an accurate statement? You've been a pastor, you work with children, and when something like that happens, when you've been helping children, you're guiding children, you're involved, God's guiding you in some way, right? Or a lot, or every way. Did it make you did you ever question your faith coming out of that situation?
Oh man, you better believe it. And I think we're all human. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human, and I don't care if if you got a pastoral degree behind you. At the end of the day, we're not perfect. We have our humanity that just comes through. And so naturally, I wondered why. And I think as a result of all of this, my faith has grew stronger, but it took time to get to that place. I actually have 2 younger brothers, and one of them was on the verge of just saying, all right, screw it, I'm becoming an atheist. How can a loving God allow my brother that's trying to do everything right be scarred and burned?
Right.
And I had an interesting conversation with a guy he served in Vietnam. And him and I, a pastor in Illinois connected us both. And we had a great phone conversation. I've since met the guy many a times and had him on my podcast show. And he shared with me the story of when he was in Vietnam. He went to throw a hand grenade, and when he tried to throw it, a sniper had shot it before he could release it, and it blew up all over his body. His face was scarred. He had fingers amputated, and for years he battled with suicidal thoughts and depression and wondered why would God allow him to be burned and scarred. And it wasn't until he was on TV years later that a lady would ask him on live television. She said, his name is Dave Reaver, by the way. She said, Dave, do you know why God would allow you to be burned and scarred? And he said, no, I don't. And he told me, he said, Cody, when she asked me that, it frustrated me. Oh, it angered me. And he said, but her words changed my life. And she said, Dave, you know, God did not do this to you. God doesn't do evil. But he allowed it to happen because he could trust you with the scars. And that statement changed everything. And I kind of look at that story in the same light, is that I believe God did not do this to me. I believe we live in a world where people have the ability to make choices. We have free will, and, you know, our choices have consequences, either good or bad. And the driver of the truck that day, he walked away fine. He walked away fine. I, on the other hand, was in the beginning left for dead, scarred and mangled. My life is now drastically changed because of this man's poor decisions. And so I had to practice forgiveness in that. But it wasn't God's fault. It was this man. But at the same time, God has taken one of the worst incidents in my life and he's turned it around for my good. But it boiled down to me making that choice to say that I'm not going to allow this to affect me negatively. And that's powerful, because I had to realize I can't change what happened to me. The only thing I can change is what I do today. That's what makes the difference. And so, you know, I could really dive in deep on that, but I don't want to.
No, I think you answered it. And I think it's, I ask everything, you know, has a purpose and a reason. And it's because I know there are people out there that have probably might be relating to the story either for themselves and others. And, you know, I think it's important to hear perspective for how people kind of got over that moment. And I think you encapsulated it perfectly. Talking with Cody Byrns, international speaker, best-selling author. So Cody, let's transition a bit. You know, you go through something that no one can ever imagine going through. You battle the natural, I'm sure, the inconceivable amount of grief combined with, you know, like getting over it and then coming back to this place of deciding you want to make something, you know, out of this. Let's talk about that period and kind of where you went from, you know, recovery to now, today, maybe.
Yeah. So as I had shared, I was in that coma, full life support for 3 weeks, and coming to was quite difficult. But I remember my family being there, and more specifically, my mother. And she told me everything that went down. Cody, you know, you've been severely burned. You was hit by a driver that failed to stop at a red light. Your recovery, it's not going to be an easy journey. But no matter what, don't lose sight of your vision. And those words stuck with me, and they still do to this day. And I think about how a lot of us in life, it's important that we have individuals to remind us of what is most important, to not lose sight of our vision. And I needed that reminder because it was certainly tempting to give up and play the victim. And there's many people in today's world that they may have every right. I certainly did. But my mom, she believed that there was something greater on the other side of her son. And just as she believed in me, I believe in people today that no matter what life has brought them, there is hope and there is a better tomorrow. So, but it took time. I had my moments where one day I'm grateful to be alive, and the next day I wonder why. And you know, all emotions are all over the place. Mm-hmm. My parents, you know, they're Christian people. I think my father, the funniest example is one minute he's in the waiting room, he's praying and asking God to heal his son. The next minute he's cursing, he's mad, he's irritated that he couldn't be there for his son that day at that red light. But can't control certain things. Things just happen. But I was in the burn unit for a total of 2.5 months. And then I had to go to a rehabilitation center. I had to relearn to walk, had to relearn to use my hands, all the basics. I was in there for another 6 weeks. Then I had to do almost 2 years of nonstop outpatient physical and occupational therapy, where I could just get to a point where I could be somewhat self-sustainable again. And many surgeries. My fingers, they wanted to amputate 3 of my fingers, actually in the burn unit. And as I had shared with you guys earlier, I'm a juggler before all this went down. And so my family, they would said, no, do whatever you can to save his fingers. He juggles. And of course, you could imagine the surgeon's face. Are we like, really? You're kidding me?
Yeah, I'm trying to save this guy's life.
So,
and you're worried about his juggling skills.
You're worried about his juggling skills. And
yeah.
So they were able to save him. They don't move like they used to, but I have adapted and I make the most of what I can do. And that in itself is a message. But it was a long road to recovery. But through all of that, I learned a lot about myself in life. And I think pain is one of our greatest teachers. And one of the most empowering moments for me was whenever I was in in-state rehab. I had gotten this garbage bag full of get well cards from all these kids that I had spoken to a couple years prior to the wreck. And it was in Oklahoma City. And everyone's, get well, Cody. And because news about this wreck spread like wildfire. Social media picked it up, TV shows. And so I had started getting this following on social media. My family's posting things. And so people were watching my response to this tragedy. And these children were watching me. And it dawned on me, I was like, oh my gosh, all these little eyes, they're watching me. And at the end of the day, we can all talk a good talk when life is going great. We can preach a good message. It sounds good. It tickles people's ears. But then when tragedy strikes and rubber hits the road, our faith, our message, everything that we're about is put to the test. And my faith in that moment, just as I shared earlier, it was put to the test. But I had to practice what I preach. And more so than words, our actions is what makes the difference. And so I had to think to myself, what am I going to act out in this moment? How am I going to be an example to these little eyes? Children watch us. They watch us. We can tell them to do something, but at the end of the day, it's how we're acting. They learn from our actions. And so I had to practice what I preach, and that hit home with me. And still does to this day. And so what example do I want to set? Why am I doing the very thing that I'm doing to begin with? Why am I speaking? Why was I speaking before? It was to give hope. It was to give hope. And what better opportunity to give hope than to utilize such a traumatic event to my advantage?
What do you
further share that message all the more?
What do you think? And I'm excited to get to where you've gone with that. What do you think differentiates people that become and embrace the victim versus people that become and embrace the other side of taking a choice and putting action in their own hand? I mean, having gone through that now, have you ever distilled that, or do you know what separates one from the other?
Yeah, I think it's just, at the end of the day, it's when you grasp that reality of how life is short, and at the end of the day, life isn't fair for anyone. We all have our ups and our downs, and there's many people that have, and I've gotten to talk with a lot of folks since all this has happened, and some of the stories that I've heard, I mean, they just baffle you, and you naturally, you're just, man, I don't know how this person is living. How could they be functioning in life? They've gone through such traumatic events, anywhere from rape victims to individuals that were born with physical deformities. I mean, the list goes on. And at the end of the day, I think it all boils down to their willpower, their choice. And because I think all of us, we could sit back and we can play that victim card. It's certainly easy. But at the end of the day, pity, it can only get you so far. And at some point, you got to put on your big boy pants and realize that this is my life. How am I going to live it? And what example do I want to set to others? Do I want to be a Debbie Downer? How do I want to be remembered? Somebody that give up, that complained and bickered and was bitter at the world, or somebody that, you know what, I'm going to get it back up and I'm going to keep pressing forward and I'm going to make something of myself and of my life. And I have more respect for people that have gone through traumatic events and they still keep pressing in. They still keep ticking on. Somebody that has gone through something in their life and they just give up, my respect for them doesn't go very far. Even though I know they have a story, they've gone through pain, but pain is inevitable. Yeah. Everybody at some point in their life will face it. It's just get back up, press forward. It's your life. It's your life. We all have a choice. And so I just choose to live my life in a positive way and get back up and make something of myself.
So transitioning, you've made that choice with the guidance of both your parents and your mother, your own willpower. What was like step one? Like, once you were at a place of recovery, like where did kind of the, building to the foundation and different things like that, but like what was kind of phase one for you?
Yeah, I think, well, there's many steps in getting to the other side of something traumatic. And I tell you, my support group made a tremendous difference. Obviously, I spoke in churches, and I had a lot of pastors and leaders that were surrounding me, a family that supported me. And there's many people, they always say to me, well, Cody, what if I didn't have a family that loved me and was there for me during my traumatic experience? And I think to myself, well, the moment you turn 18 years old, you are in charge of putting your support system in place. There is people out there in your life, out there in this world that care about you. It's just a matter of finding those individuals, reaching out and forming that relationship with them. And a lot of these people, these pastors, leaders, mentors, I had formed that before all this happened, and it made a big difference. And so our surroundings have a powerful impact on our lives. And I had to put myself in a good environment, an environment that would encourage me, support me. I had to listen to good podcasts, read good books, watch good television shows, not negative stuff. Lord knows there's a lot of negative in today's world. And also there was people that I had relationships with before the wreck, and they came to me and they wanted to talk down to me and really down and be Debbie Downers with me. Misery loves company. And so I had to remove myself from some of those individuals. It doesn't mean I'm better than them, but it certainly just means that I'm wanting something better with my life. And so if you want good results to come about, find those individuals that are producing good results and grab a hold of them, communicate with them, go do activities with them, because you need that. We need each other. And so, but I always talk about the epic steps, and I actually am going to be releasing a coaching program online where we're going to dive into these steps a little bit deeper. But even whenever I go speaking for corporate events, colleges, the list goes on, I will share these things. And there's a free PDF that I make available to all listeners and viewers. It's at epiclifegameplan.com. epiclifegameplan.com. If they go on there, they type their name, their email, they can download these steps and utilize them in their own lives. But EPIC is an acronym. If you want to live an epic life, you apply these steps. So the E stands for embrace challenges. Challenges will always present themselves at one level or another. It's just something we have to embrace. And then we have the P, which is provide perspective. How can I look at this situation differently? What are the lessons I can learn through my pain? And then we have the I, which is implement change, applying those lessons to our lives. And then we have the C, which is celebrate. Celebrate your story. Celebrate the fact that you're here, that you're alive, that you have another day to live. And out of that celebration, we're serving others. We're serving others and making a positive impact on the world around us. And for me, these are steps that I learned through this event and steps that I continue to live out on a daily basis because they apply not only in our personal lives, but they can also apply in our professions, our businesses. And so it's certainly something that I encourage everybody to grab a hold of and take action.
I like it, man. I love I'm in marketing. I love a good acronym. Hopefully you remember things and as I heard you say that, I was like thinking it from both a personal level and a business level, and I was like, I see a lot of business practice there as I was listening. I know you've been fortunate enough to, and I should say the audiences where you've spoke have been fortunate enough to hear your story and hear you speak. Can you talk about any of those or memorable moments, since the accident, where in, any, what do they say, favorite moments from some of those speaking opportunities?
Oh yeah, I mean there's so many. I mean this story. I've been so fortunate since all this has happened, and this was back in 2013. Here we are in 2021, and it's been remarkable to see all that has happened. I released the book, Scar Release: Breaking Free of Yesterday's Troubles. That's made a huge impact on people's lives, and the speaking has really transformed into not so much working with children. I mean, I'll still do some kids events, but those are rare nowadays. Mostly it's teenagers, adults, corporate audiences, colleges, even correctional facilities, prisons. And I spoke at one back in 2019. A lot of men that have, their whole lives have been dramatically changed because of their poor choices. And, I think the nature of my story, it hits home with a lot of folks because, I was scarred because of somebody else's poor choice, and I had to practice forgiveness. But then, like in places like correctional facilities, they are scarred because of their own poor choices. So now, not only do they have to, practice forgiveness, but practice forgiveness on themselves. They have to forgive themselves, and so it really hits home. I think the metaphor of scars, whether they are physical or emotional, really connects. And really in my book, that's something that I address. Scar release is actually named after a surgical procedure that they do on burn survivors. And as a burn survivor, I have contracture scars. And when a contracture scar occurs over the top of the joint, it can limit the mobility of that joint. And so, for example, with my hands had contracted to the point where I couldn't even hold onto a bottle of water. My joints were very immobile. It was very challenging to function and do things. So I was there with the occupational therapist, and she said, Cody, you need surgery. So I went up to the burn unit. They're surgeons. They're also plastic surgeons. They began to assess me. And they said, we're going to need to do a surgical contracture release, otherwise known as a scar release. And during that procedure, they go in, they cut the scar at its root, and it frees you up and allows you to be mobile. But a scar release procedure doesn't remove the appearance of a scar. It allows the mobility to move with the scar. And so that's really what I would try to teach people, is that everyone at some point in their life, they have been burned. Divorce, loss of a job, loved one, list goes on. And those burning moments create scars. And if we're not careful, those scars, if they're over the top of different joints in our life, for example, business, relationships, being a parent, there's different joints. If the problem is not addressed, then it limits our mobility and how we function in those areas. And the key to freeing up that scar is, finding the root of the problem. And for many people, it's just sitting with themselves and thinking, why am I affected in this area? What is the root cause? And a lot of folks don't want to take the time out to really examine themselves because it brings up past pain and hurt. And surgery, a scar release, is certainly not a walk in the park. It still hurts. But in the long run, it frees me up. And I still have the scars. Scars are permanent, whether they are physical or emotional. It's just I'm not allowing those scars to limit me and my mobility and how I function in life. And so that really has hit home with a lot of people, college students, corporate. I mean, it's been quite remarkable to hear some of the conversations and some of the people that have shared with me their own personal stories. And so this is the most rewarding job ever. I love it.
That's, hearing you talk about that, it kind of almost like some of the questions I've asked been building towards that, because I think back to like what differentiates those that get over it and that don't. And maybe they need to read your book first and foremost, but like plug, yes, but actually very serious. The difference is, I think, if they've, because again, I mean, I think of things I've been through. I think of friends. I think everybody's had these moments that we all have scar tissue, but the ones that are able to create some kind of relief, but it's both relief, release, whatever it is. Because I think that's the difference, is the people that get over that and the ones that don't, and it's so crazy how the analogy between the surgery and how it relays to life in so many ways. It's crazy how all this builds. But it goes back to me. I think I believe everything happens for a purpose. It's just something I've always believed in. I do have faith, but I've also just kind of been wired that way. And I hear your story, and it feels like just, whether it's a higher power or, intestinal fortitude or whatever, but it feels like it's also purposeful in telling the story and what you've done with the book, what you're doing with the foundation and all those things. It's amazing, man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And it really is. I look at, life, it truly is a gift. And when you go through something so traumatic at a young age, you learn to appreciate life, and you find out what is most important at the end of the day. And back whenever I was in my younger 20s, it was like some of the things I was worried about really aren't worth my time and energy. So I try to examine my life. And if there's things I'm getting frustrated over, I'm like, is this really worth it? And most of the time it's not. And so I just focus on what is the overall good of what I'm looking to achieve in my life. And that is to bring hope. So I try to lead every area of my life by that. There's a powerful quote that I love sharing. And I was given this quote by actually one of my mentors who ended up passing back in 2019, Dr. Sean Stevenson, an amazing speaker, author, did a lot in his life. And his big thing was, he was actually, I'll say this, he was born with a physical deformity. He's only 3 foot tall, 3 foot tall, lived in a wheelchair, just turned 40 years old, and he was trying out a wheelchair, and he has a fragile bone disorder, trying out a new wheelchair, and I guess the wheelchair had tipped over and he broke his skull. And he had bleeding on the brain. He was in surgery, and unfortunately he did not make it. But he lived his life by that. Actually, his last words, he told his wife, he said, "This is happening for me and not to me." And he lived his entire career with that. He was born with this injury, and he had to look at it. This is happening for me, not to me. Changed everything. But there's this quote that he shared with me, and I love, and I'll share it with all of you. It's actually by, I think, a lady by the name of Caitlin Walsh. And it says, the key to success is playing the hand you were dealt like it was the hand that you wanted. And I think it's just a matter of, how are we going to play our cards? And I played my cards in the way that I wanted to, and it has served me in every area of my life, and I'm super grateful.
I love it, man. Where can everyone learn more about your story? Let's give them the website for downloading the piece again. Where can everybody kind of follow along with everything that's going on with Cody Byrns these days?
Yeah, so my website, codybyrns.com, CODYBYRNS.com. They can Google me. There's all kinds of videos and articles out there. But I'm mostly active on social media. I would say more than any of them, it's Instagram at the Cody Byrns. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter. I'm not much of a Twitter guy, but I do have an account for those that are interested.
Kind of like me.
It's like Twitter. It is what it is. And then there's a LinkedIn, but I also have my email, info@codybyrns.com. And if anybody would like to reach out to me directly, just send me a message. I'd be more than happy to connect.
I love it, man. Very motivational. I encourage everyone to go check out Scar Release. I'm sure on Amazon, anywhere on your website, we can buy it.
Here's what it looks like. And so it's digital and paperback. Yeah. It is available.
Great. So everybody go check that out. Go follow along with Cody Byrns. I really appreciate it, brother, having you on the show, telling your story. I think we've just scratched the surface. I know they can learn more with the book and on your site, but so appreciative of you coming on today.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Hey, man, you know where to find us. We're at theradcast.com. Search for Cody Byrns. Search for Scar Release. You'll find all the content from today's episode. You know where to find me. I'm at Ryan Alford on all the platforms. We'll see you next time on the Radcast.